Hello everyone and welcome to the Daily Signal's Top 10. I'm Jenny Malzabano and I'm joined by fellow contributor to the Daily Signal, Jarrett Stepman. He is also the co-host of the podcast, The Right Side of History. Jarrett, thank you.
Thank you.
Today we are breaking down some of the top 10 extreme leftist outrage moments from the past week. And boy, there were a lot of them, so we're going to jump right into it. To start off, is the leftist rhetoric out of control? Many argue yes. Watch this mashup.
You could put half of Trump supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables.
Right now, a third of Americans actually believe that a second civil war will happen within the next 5 years.
This way, other way. That's it right there. Pull it up.
Sorry, what is this? Today's news. Oh, I do need to catch up. That's correct. The world is on fire.
I like that you're all a part of it. When was the last time an actor assassinated a president?
I feel like the bottom has to fall out at some point. And by the way, I'm hoping for it because I think one way you get rid of Trump is a crashing economy. Yeah. So please bring on the recession.
That's just a small sample of what we've seen. Kathy Griffin, Whoopi Goldberg. I mean, who else?
Well, it's been a lot, especially in the last week. I think we've really seen a step up in the exaggerated remarks. I mean, the absolutely crazy calls that are coming from the left. And I think after a few setbacks, certainly at the Supreme Court and elsewhere, I think that we're going to have more and more of this really over-the-top heated rhetoric coming from the left as they feel that they are out of power and they can't affect policy right now.
And we already have, and we're going to dive into this even more throughout the show. That's just a little taste of what we've already encountered, unfortunately. All right, number 9, I'm sure many of you have heard, Sarah Huckabee Sanders was kicked out of the Red Hen restaurant. She was just trying to grab dinner with her family. Check this out.
Many by now have heard that I was asked to leave a restaurant this weekend where I attempted to have dinner with my family. My husband and I politely left and went home. I was asked to leave because I work for President Trump. We are allowed to disagree, but we should be able to do so freely and without fear of harm. And this goes for all people regardless.
Wow. So Sarah Huckabee Sanders kicked out of the restaurant. You know, a lot of people have made a great point that the restaurant was allowed to kick her out. You know, she's allowed to talk about it. And then as Americans, we're allowed to decide whether or not we want to give that restaurant our business.
Yeah, absolutely. I think some have tried to compare it a little bit to the Jack Phillips case. And I do think there is some distinction here because Phillips, of course, said that he wouldn't specifically bake the kind of cake that was wanted by this couple. I mean, this is a restaurant which outright kicked her out. And I say, you know, it is a problem, even though it's something that I think this business does have a right to do. It is a problem when you say you can't eat at a certain place because you're a conservative or a liberal. It does say something about where things are going in this country. And I mean, do I have to ask when I step into a restaurant, do you serve conservatives? I mean, that's a kind of ridiculous thing, right?
Yeah, in the past week, the left has been trying to draw an exact comparison between the two situations that you just discussed. There are similarities, but it's important to note they are not the same. All right, number 8, this was just truly horrifying. Congresswoman Maxine Waters is calling for mobs, calling for Trump administration officials to be harassed. Watch her instructing her followers what to do.
If you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome anymore.
Now, people like Nancy Pelosi did really frown upon this, got on her about using that type of rhetoric, which is good. I applaud them for doing that. You wrote a piece on this. What is the danger of this type of rhetoric that, especially now in the age of social media, we've seen just has been blasted everywhere?
Yeah, absolutely. I wrote about Abraham Lincoln, 1836, this very famous Lyceum address, talked about the use of mob justice to go after people who you disagree with, other political opponents. The way you change things is through disagreement, discourse, and elections and things like this, not sending mobs to harass your political opponents where they eat, where they sleep, where they live. I mean, that's what I think is really disturbing about this call, and it's shocking to see a member of Congress actually suggest that people gather in mobs to harass others while they're going about their lives. I think a lot of people are afraid that this is going to become the norm in America.
Yeah, it's a slippery slope, and we've seen last June this kind of stuff can become deadly, so she should stop now. Number 7, the Women's March is calling for civil unrest. Watch this.
Dr. Martin Luther King warned us about people like Chuck Schumer. He said it wasn't the Ku Klux Klan and the white citizen counselors who were the obstacles towards justice. It was the people calling for, quote, civility, and people that were telling us when to protest, at what time, and how to protest.
Okay, I spoke about this with our colleague Kelsey Harkness on this week's Problematic Women. The Women's March, they assume that they speak for all women, and clearly they don't, whether it's in terms of election, in terms of behavior. Why would they call for civil unrest? What do they have to gain by that?
Well, it's incredible. I mean, they're basically backing up what Congresswoman Maxine Waters said, which is about this unrest. And I find it ironic. Most of the people we've seen the last few weeks who've been attacked by these mobs harassing are, in fact, women. They're Republican women who work for the administration. I do find it, look, if there are a lot of people in this country that think that the Women's March speaks for them, well, look what they're doing right now. They're actually going after women and calling for, basically mobs to harass them. I mean, that doesn't seem like something that's necessarily the solidarity of all women when conservative women are excluded from that list.
And most of the Trump officials being harassed are women, and harassing people is not a policy solution. Sure, it gets your name out there for a day or two and goes viral, but in terms of long term, it does nothing. Number 6, Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi was harassed while at the movie theater. She was seeing Mr. Rogers, ironically. Watch this.
Inciting violence. It's not just yelling at someone and cursing at someone in a public place. They were trying to create a fight. So then we went into the movie, and I said, I'm not going to leave. By then, there were marked units everywhere. And so after the movie, they said, do you want to go out the back door? And I said, no way. I'm not going to be bullied by them. We're walking out the door that we came.
Poor Pam Bondi. She's at the movies trying to see Mr. Rogers with her boyfriend. Thank goodness some state troopers were there with her. I, as a woman, just when she was talking about how they would circle back around her, get in her face, they were so close to her, they were spitting on her, they were trying to taunt her boyfriend, which, can you imagine the fiasco that would have become? Just truly a nightmare. And I love that she pointed out, she personally can't do anything about some of these policies. It's up to Congress now.
Right, she even opposes some of them. And what I find incredible is, what exactly are these people accomplishing by doing this? I mean, harassing this woman when she's coming out of a movie theater, what exactly they're changing? What policies are changing? By aggressively going after somebody who they disagree with, nothing's really happening. I think it almost seems like they're doing it just to feel good about themselves and what they're doing, rather than actually trying to change any policies. They're just lashing out.
They are, and I don't think the left has realized yet that this type of behavior really only helps President Trump's message and his case. All right, number 5, Elaine Chao, the Secretary of Transportation, also the wife of Mitch McConnell, confronted some protesters.
Why are you separating families? Huh? Why are you separating families? Why are you separating families?
Why did you leave my husband alone?
Why are you separating families?
Why did you leave my husband alone?
I'm not trying to disrespect you, but why is he separating families?
He's not.
I'm not trying to
disrespect you.
I'm not trying to disrespect you. He's separating families. He's separating forces. How does he sleep at night? How does he sleep at night? It is not a legal assignment. How does he sleep at night? It is not legal.
So Elaine Chao, another woman in the Trump administration, she's also an immigrant herself, worked for the George W. Bush administration as well. She was not having it, and she fought back and shouted back, and her own security was like, okay, hold on. I thought it was kind of nice to see somebody get fired up.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was very well deserved. I mean, she got harassed coming out of an event, and she gave it back. And she said, I just love her line, you stay away from my husband, which I thought was absolutely great. I mean, she's definitely not somebody that you want to push around, and she wasn't going to take it from these two individuals who encountered her. And I think, this is sometimes the only way you can push back is say, stay away from me, leave me alone. I mean, there's nothing else she can do. So good on Elaine Chao doing that. I mean, that's really a funny thing to see.
Yeah, I agree with you. And this wasn't, a protest outside the Capitol or in a public space necessarily. They found out where Mitch McConnell and Elaine Chao were coming out of an event, went there, really got in their faces. That kind of thing can turn dangerous very quickly. Number 4, Michael Moore is back, and he's saying we have to put our bodies on the line to stop President Trump. Check this out.
To answer your question, the end game, sadly, is going to be Trump is not going to leave. He plans to be reelected. He loves the term president for life. The only way that we're going to stop this is eventually we're all going to have to put our bodies on the line. You're going to have to be willing to
All right, Jared, I'm not really sure how to start unpacking this one, but Michael Moore is back and he is not pleased with President Trump. What do you think about his calls for people to put their bodies on the line?
I mean, it's quite ridiculous, honestly. I mean, he's calling for essentially, I mean, if you can read between the lines, for, again, political unrest, maybe some aggressive action toward authorities. I don't know. But, you know, this has been Michael Moore's MO. I mean, usually it's somebody else's bodies on the line for somebody like Michael Moore, who really doesn't end up in any of these, you know, serious incidents, whatnot, and he's just kind of trying to gin up the left-wing base to get excited. So I can't say it's something outside the norm for Michael Moore. He's kind of used to doing these kind of political stunts and whatnot, but it is a reckless call if you're talking about people actually getting involved in violence and things like that. So it is very reckless.
And it's fueling this fire of just angry and hateful rhetoric that we're seeing, unfortunately. All right, number 3, Senator Kristen Gillibrand is one of many lawmakers calling for ICE to be abolished.
I don't think ICE today is working as intended.
Well, you think you should get rid of the agency?
I believe that it has become a deportation force, and I think you should separate the criminal justice from the immigration issues, and I think you should reimagine ICE under a new agency with a very different mission and take those two missions out. And so we believe that we should protect families that need our help, and that is not what ICE is doing today, and that's why I believe you should get rid of it, start over, reimagine it, and build something that actually works.
All right, so she's one of many calling for this organization to be abolished. I think it's Congressman Pocan from Wisconsin actually drafted legislation to get rid of it. ICE plays a very important role, and President Trump spoke about this at a rally this past week. He said, look, if we get rid of ICE, okay, great. Criminals, MS-13, they're going to overrun our country. They play a very significant role.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's interesting about Gillibrand is the question is, well, then what next? I mean, what do we do for border enforcement? I don't think there's any answer to that. And I think it really does get down to what they really want. A lot of people on the left, the far left, which is a growing number of people, they really want an open borders policy, one way or another. The abolishing ICE is simply one way to get to that point. I think a lot of Americans believe that and are onto that, but I think ultimately what this comes down to, there's no alternative policy in how to better enforce our borders. It's all just, well, we just need to have open borders, we just need to have mass amnesty, which I think is the real goal.
It's become quickly apparent that abolishing ICE is the new kind of hot take to get behind. I bet if you spoke to many of these people and asked, what does ICE do specifically, I can guarantee you they could not name several important tasks that they carry out. All right, number 2, the left goes for the Nazi metaphors as usual. Again, now Rich Lowry had a great piece in the National Review, enough with a Nazi charge. You know, we've spoken about this a little bit, about how it's dangerous to conflate everything you don't like or everything you don't approve of in the political realm with Nazism, with fascism. It's dangerous, and also, I don't know if you agree with me, I feel like it's kind of a lazy argument. Like, if you don't like a solution or a policy, counter it. Don't just say, oh, Trump's Hitler. I mean, there's a danger in saying everything's Hitler that you don't like.
Yeah, and it weakens your argument enormously. I think part of the problem with all these outrage attacks is that everything that the Trump administration does is seen as beyond the pale. And we had tax cuts, it was the end of the Constitution. When the FCC chairman ended net neutrality, he was getting death threats. And I think that's what it escalates. And when you're comparing your political opponents to Nazis, it gives you a leeway to essentially harass them and use mobs and things like this. That's why I think it's so dangerous that we're hearing so much of this rhetoric coming from the left today.
Absolutely. All right, number 1, this just absolutely blew up. The left has melted down over Justice Kennedy announcing his retirement.
Our Republican colleagues in the Senate should follow the rule they set in 2016, not to consider a Supreme Court justice in an election year. Senator McConnell would tell anyone who listened that the Senate had the right to advise and consent, and that was every bit as important as the president's right to nominate. Millions of people are just months away from determining the senators who should vote to confirm or reject the president's nominee, and their voices deserve to be heard now, as Leader McConnell thought they should deserve to be heard then. Anything but that would be the absolute height of hypocrisy.
I saw a lot of tweets that were just, I mean, it was a liberal meltdown. I think my favorite one, someone was like, this is Armageddon. I mean, it's all ending. They even played, was it a DNC conference line when they found out the news? I think some people were crying. Is it as bad as they think?
Well, I mean, to a certain extent, if we see all policies being solved at the Supreme Court level, I suppose there's some kind of logic to the left being afraid right now that all their favorite policies are going to go away. But at the same time, I think people need to do need to take a step back and to a certain extent assess how powerful the Supreme Court is coming to solving all decisions. They're afraid that things like Roe v. Wade are going to be overturned. Well, maybe they were based on some poor reasoning by courts years and years ago. So there's a lot of overheated stuff. And look, there could be more justices on the Supreme Court appointed by President Trump in upcoming days. I mean, the left is already acting so outraged and so ridiculous. I mean, who knows what they're going to do when we have more of these appointments to the courts. I hate to see what the left is actually going to come up with next.
I know, and there have been some disgusting tweets from some people on the left saying, you know, stock up on abortions. Well, if Roe v. Wade is overturned, doesn't it just bounce it back to the states?
Right. Honestly, the debate starts if Roe v. Wade got overturned, because then it goes to the states, and the states can decide themselves what they think about the issue of abortion. So a lot of the rhetoric here is completely over the top. And of course, you know, we're kind of used to seeing this, but I think after the Kennedy announcement, I think it really stepped things into overdrive.
It never ends. All right, you all, thank you for joining us this week. We'll see you back here next week. Have a great weekend.